Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Upper Bowl Perspective, a Utah Jazz podcast giving you Upper Bowl point of view with courtside quality. I'm here with my co-hosts, Kyler and Landon. And boys, as always, it's great to get together, talk a little basketball. And for our listeners, welcome back for season 2. It's been a little bit delayed. For those of you who are longtime listeners of the show, we started back in the offseason of 2019, which up until that point was like the Jazz offseason of the decade. And we talked a lot about just different trades that happened. That's when we got Mike Conley. That's when we signed Bojan Bogdanovic. And it was a really huge turning point for the Jazz and what we thought their franchise was going to look like. And I think we can safely say that 2019 is going to be old news after 2022. This is definitely going to be the offseason that's going to define what the Jazz is going to look like, not only for the next few seasons, but really what their strategy is going long-term and going forward. I think if we can describe the 2021 to 2022 season in like one word, it would be disappointing. I mean, going into the playoffs, we had Defensive Player of the Year Rudy Gobert, Sixth Man of the Year Jordan Clarkson, the best record in the entire NBA in the regular season, the first seed in the Western Conference, and then we play the Clippers, the second round. I know we both went to at least one game in person, and just seeing them absolutely collapse to a Kawhi-less Clippers team in the second round, it just kind of seemed in some ways like the beginning of the end. And we had a much more disappointing season here in the 2021-2022 season. We saw a lower record, a first-round playoff exit to the Mavs of all teams, and now we're kind of in a position of what are the Jazz going to do? And then as the metaphorical cherry on top of an extremely disappointing season, we find out yesterday that Quin Snyder, second winningest coach in Jazz history, 8 years with the team, has decided to step down despite having 1 year left on his contract. So hopefully that's a pretty good recap. But Kyler, Landon, as two of the biggest diehard Jazz fans I know, how has just been your feelings in general been of the Jazz this season, how you're feeling now, and also how you're feeling towards the future?
I'm gonna be honest, J. Bobby. You said it's disappointing. I don't even know if season was disappointing to me. I kind of saw it coming. I was very pessimistic heading into the season. I felt like I knew exactly what the Jazz first round playoff strategy was going to be since last playoffs, and they did exactly what I thought they were going to do. They were just such a team that was so predictable, and I think that goes into the move off of Quin Snyder. The Jazz had their system. They were what they were, and they went as far as they could with the roster that they built. And to me, this is exactly kind of how I thought this season was going, and I was hoping that it would lead to some change. Because last year, we were the number 1 seed, but like we had by far the best luck in terms of injury and missed COVID games and stuff like that. And so I knew that luck wasn't going to keep going. Also, just like the most insane Jordan Clarkson year he's ever going to have in his career. Like, he's still good, but that year was incredible. And so I kind of saw the downfall coming, and I expected it. Everyone was kind of, especially early in the season, thought I was way too down on the Jazz, but I think in the end I had a pretty accurate read on them.
Yeah, to go off of that, I think that every Jazz fan this season went through the stages of grief with respect to like the inevitability of the death of this team. I think we all eventually reached that conclusion that Kyler reached, where, this version of the team is dead. It's not going anywhere. But that manifested itself in different ways. Some people realized that at the start of the season. Some people didn't realize that until, we were playing the Mavericks. But to go along with that, I think there's some relief, I think, that goes along with this, because I think there was clearly some, tension, some stress within that Jazz organization. There's frustration with the fans. So now we can kind of put that all behind us, start new, and start building towards the future.
Absolutely. And I think as of right now, I think we can kind of maybe let what happened in the past. And we're looking forward to a future where the Jazz might actually become legit title contenders down the road. But then comes the question, how is this actually going to look like? And it starts from the top down. As we mentioned before, Quin Snyder has stepped down, and there's going to be some very big shoes to fill with Quin Snyder leaving the Jazz. And for the next few minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what are some of the biggest head coaching candidates we think that would do the best job in terms of filling those shoes that Quin Snyder is leaving there in Salt Lake. So we'll go through quickly one by one and give our 30-second spiel of who do you think is the best head coaching candidate for the job and why. We'll go Landon and then Kyler, and then I'll give my point of view.
So my initial thought when I heard this was Terry Stotts. I also thought Igor Koskovich would have been a great hire too, but it sounds like he's going to Brooklyn. He's leaving wherever he was going to go. He's going to go somewhere else. So I just think he's probably off the table. But I know Terry Stotts, he has some, pretty good coaching experience. He coached some pretty successful Portland Trailblazers teams with Damian Lillard. I feel like there's certain similarities between this Jazz team and those Portland Trailblazers teams. I think he might be able to step in fairly seamlessly. He's definitely real X's and O's guys, kind of like Quin. I think he could really, optimize the roster the way that Quin could. So I think if you want the most seamless approach into this next season, considering you're factoring what they're going to decide to do, Terry Stotts is probably someone I think they should really look at.
Yeah. For those listeners who maybe are more hardcore Jazz fans than they are NBA fans, as Landon mentioned, Terry Stotts, longtime coach of the Portland Trailblazers. I think he coached there for 6 or 7 years. He was basically there for all the defining moments of the Dame kind of CJ era in Portland until he was separated from the Trailblazers last season before Chauncey Billups became the head coach. So he hasn't been a head coach for a year now, but he's definitely been kind of like a Mike D'Antoni has been over the course of his career, where anytime a new head coaching job comes up, everyone's saying Terry Stotts is a good fit to fill that role. And I think out of all the options that the Jazz could potentially hire, he's probably the one that is maybe the least risky in terms of, do we know if he's going to be good or not? Because he has proven that he can take a team to the Western Conference Finals. He's shown that he can take a team to postseasons 5+ years in a row. But I think the question comes down to, is that Terry Stotts seems like a very safe option. And I think with him, you kind of know what you're going to get. You're going to get a head coach that's probably an average coach in the league, good at the X's and O's, maybe not so good at other things. But are there other options that are maybe a little bit risky or maybe a little bit unproven that could be a better option in the league? Which I think Kyler, with the head coaching candidate you're looking at, he might feel a little bit more into that category of high risk, high reward, unproven, rather than the safe bet in Terry Stotts.
Yeah, and just to continue talking about Terry for a little bit, in general, what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about coaches, I'm a little bit wary of former coaches, just because there's a reason they're a former coach, right? And so you kind of have to ask yourself, why did he leave that organization? Was it personnel based or was it coaching based? Was he just put in a bad situation? You have to be comfortable with why he was let go. And so I favor the risk like J. Bobby was getting towards. And the guy that I'm really interested in is Adrian Griffin. He's currently the lead assistant for the Toronto Raptors under Nick Nurse. He was there for the 2019 title team. He was the lead assistant then as well. He's been getting some other interviews recently. I know he interviewed for the Lakers vacancy this offseason. And I feel like we haven't really talked much about Quin yet, but just the thing that left me wanting the most out of Quin was his ability to adjust, just mid-game or mid-series adjustments. I feel like the Jazz have the same strategy. And just someone that I know that I've been personally impressed with their ability to adjust mid-series is the Raptors. The way they played Golden State in the finals, where they just decided to play box and one on Steph Curry. That was something that wasn't super common. And they've showed the willingness to take kind of those risks and those adjustments to maybe if it's a close series and you're evenly matched, or maybe when you're a little bit outmatched, you got to take risks in those adjustments. And so I'm hoping that that's something that Nick Nurse has handed down to Adrian. He's a former player as well. He played for 9 or 10 years in the league. And so that's something that I like in coaches as well. I think there's a real relatability to players that you get from former players. And so that would be somebody that I would be looking at.
Yeah. I know that he's been getting a lot of buzz now for multiple off seasons as somebody who I think with Adrian Griffin, it's not if he's going to get a head coaching job, it's when it's going to happen. And I think if the Jazz don't get him this off season, I think that there's a very good chance that he's probably not even on the table in the next year or two. So he's definitely a very solid candidate. For me personally, I think one thing I admire the most about the Jazz organization, just as a Jazz fan, is how good their front office tends to work with the coaches and players and really building that internal culture and just being a very, very well-run organization. So personally, I would love if the Jazz could bring back a guy who already knows Utah, knows our system, knows our players, and can make more of a seamless transition there. So for me personally, I love Johnny Bryant as a candidate. He was a longtime assistant for the Jazz. He really focused on player development. He was really closely involved in like the progression of players like Royce O'Neal and Donovan Mitchell. And now he's one of the assistants for the New York Knicks. And he's been getting a lot of buzz as somebody who's a younger guy who's been super successful in the assistant coach role and could very easily transition to a head coach role here in the next few years. I think there's a lot of pros with him, or very similar pros that Kyler talked about with Adrian Griffin. I think that he's younger. I think he's more open to change. I think he's very much a player's coach, and the players tend to love him just as a coach. And I think he's someone who can really develop talent better than most coaches, as he showed when he was with Utah, which I think a small market team like Utah is always going to need to develop their second round draft picks or their late first round draft picks, or even their undrafted guys if they want to be successful long term, just because we're not the sexy free agency destination that places like an LA or Miami or New York is going to be. So just for that reason, I think there's a lot of really highly touted assistant coaches that I would love to see in head coaching jobs and I think would be good fits for the Jazz. But just because of his relationship with the Jazz already, along with his player development strategy, I just think he makes a lot of sense for the organization.
My fear with Johnny Bryant, if the Jazz do the interviewing process and they genuinely think he's the best head coach candidate, then yeah, go for it. But my fear with him is there's been a lot of reporting that he's the Donovan Mitchell guy, right? And I don't want the organization to hire Johnny Bryant because of Donovan Mitchell. I feel like, yeah, Donovan's a good player and you want him to stick around, but he's not the level of player that you make coaching hires for. He's never made an all-NBA team. He's never made it past the second round of the playoffs. I don't think he's entitled to that level of pandering yet. I think there's a possibility that he might become the head coach because of Donovan Mitchell, and that's what scares me. And when there might be someone that the Jazz liked more, but they hired Johnny Bryant to appease Donovan Mitchell.
With that, I feel like there's kind of this paradox with Johnny Bryant where I feel like his talents would be best used for the Jazz in helping rebuild a team, right? Like really what he hangs his hat on is development. If we keep Donovan Mitchell, that's not a full rebuild, right? That's a partial rebuild. We're retooling around him, making him the centerpiece. And I don't know if like a retooling type of job or something like that would be something that Johnny Bryant would be best at, especially as like a first-time coach. So obviously you keep him or you bring him in to make Mitchell happy, but I really don't think that optimizes what Johnny Bryant could do if you do keep Mitchell. I think you'd want to bring him in if you were going to do a full rebuild and want to develop, new young players that you're going to build your team around.
Yeah, I mean, but thinking on the plus side, Quin Snyder, that was his MO, right? He was the player development guy, and I think even though you might be disappointed in the way his tenure ended, you have to definitely view his tenure with the Jazz as a success overall, considering he joined up with a 25-win team and then took them to 6 straight playoff runs. So is there a chance that Johnny Bryant could have similar success and turn from a player development coach into like a playoff team coach that can kind of maximize those guys? Sure. But I do agree with Landon that he's more of a, hey, we have some young prospects that we want to develop. Let's hire Johnny Bryant because we believe that he'll do good at that.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it fun, is because there are a lot of names that have been thrown out. The ones that we've mentioned, the Adrian Griffin, the Terry Stotts. Landon also briefly mentioned Igor Kokoskov, which he could be a great fit, but he's probably going to Brooklyn. And then we also have the Johnny Bryant as well. But there's been a few more names that have also been thrown out that we can go through quickly. So what I'll do is that I'll give you a name and maybe give me a grade on what you would give the Jazz if that's who they hired as the head coach, along with a 10-second spiel of why. Let's go first. Alex Jensen. He is the longest tenured assistant coach with the Jazz, and he's been very talked about as a very easy internal hire. Landon, what would you give that head coaching hire?
B-. I mean, he's got the experience. He's pretty well respected within the Jazz organization. I think they feel comfortable handing it over to him. I don't know what his potential is as a coach. I have no idea. I think they're probably better, swing for the fence type of coaches you could bring in. But he's solid. He definitely deserves a look. He deserves consideration.
My first thought was B- too, but for the sake of being different, I'll give it a C+, because I think there's equal parts better risk hires and equal part better safe hires than Alex Jensen. I think he's just like and the Jazz said they're going to be thorough and they're going to look at a lot of people. I don't think that ends up turning into Alex Jensen. I think if it was a rushed hire, like a temporary hire, then his chances go up. But I think the Jazz are looking more for the super safe or super risky but high upside guy. I don't think Alex Jensen just kind of offers a mid-level of both.
Yeah. That's actually funny. My initial thought was B- too. So for once, we are completely aligned as a group that Alex Jensen would be a B- hire. Let's maybe switch gears a little bit. If the Jazz are really looking to maybe get a little bit frisky just because this person hasn't coached in the NBA for a minute, let's take a look at Becky Hammon. Now, me personally, I love Becky Hammon. For those of you who aren't familiar with her, she was a very long time assistant under Greg Popovich with the Spurs and was touted for years as one of the top 2 or 3 best assistants in the entire league. She recently made the transition after interviewing for several head coaching jobs in the NBA and never being offered the role, to now she's been coaching in the WNBA for about a year, being the most highly regarded and highly compensated coach in that league, down there in Las Vegas, coaching for the Aces. Me personally, I love Becky Hammon. I would love to see her with the Jazz just because I think that, well, I wouldn't say that she's the best at anything. She's just so solid all around. She's great with players. She's great with the X's and O's. She's just kind of great around the board. But I'd love to get your thoughts. If the Jazz were to hire Becky Hammon, what would you think?
B+ for me is what I'd give it. I think she's really solid. And my only fear, I hate the person that I'm going to sound like saying this, is like, if they make the hire because of the headlines that it gets, then but if she ends up generally being the best candidate because of, her knowledge of basketball and whatnot, and the way you feel like she can command a team, then yes, absolutely hire her. I think it's good. But it's another one that I kind of fear maybe that there might be other reasons why she would be hired. But I do think she's after Adrian Griffin, she was my second favorite candidate. So I think it would be a B+, maybe A- higher.
Yeah, I'll give it a B. I think she's paid her dues. I think she's really knowledgeable. I know they loved her down there in San Antonio. I'm trying to think about like any potential downside with her, and really like the thing I can think of would be, what the headlines are going to read, right? Like, did you hire not based on merit? Did you hire for PR reasons? But no, I definitely think she deserves a shot in the NBA. It'd be cool if the Jazz, at least gave her some consideration if she wants to leave. I think that would do a lot for the franchise as well. For being honest, I think having a female head coach would be kind of a cool thing for the Utah Jazz to say that they have.
Yeah. And once again, for those who are hardcore Jazz fans and maybe not hardcore NBA fans, there is absolutely no question at all that she is qualified for a head coaching position. She's one of the longest tenured, one of the most successful assistant coaches we've had in league history. She's fantastic. amazing candidate. Last year when she was interviewing, I think she interviewed for both the New York job when Tom Thibodeau got the job, and then also when Chauncey Billups ended up getting the Portland job. I think she made it to the final round of both of those interviews, and there was a lot of just talk that, are they actually going to hire her? Are they actually considering it? Because while she's absolutely qualified for the job, there also comes to the thing of, just the headlines around it were crazy. Everyone was writing about it saying, are they bringing her in because they think she's a great candidate for their position, for what their needs are? Is she a great fit? Or are they just bringing her in for the headline? So personally, kind of like Kyler, I had Johnny Bryan as my number one. I have her as my number two. I would be stoked just because I think that there's really no weaknesses in her coaching resume. And I think she would be a great fit, but there would definitely be a lot of headlines if she were to get the job. But I don't think the Jazz should deter that. But in general, the goal is find the best candidate, make sure it's a fit for what we want to do as our organization. And Becky Hammond should certainly be on the short list of candidates for that. Let's go through three more real quick. Let's look at a couple former coaches, see what you think. Frank Vogel, recently fired for the Lakers. What would you give that grade?
Maybe his strength is dealing with diva stars, which I guess you could say Donovan Mitchell is, but not to the level that I'm making a hire off of it. And I honestly think the Lakers won that title because of LeBron and AD, not because of Vogel. So I wouldn't like it.
Yeah, C-. And I think if his best thing is saying that he can, manage superstars, manage divas, I would say he did a bad job of that, considering all the, Westbrook stuff that went on last year. I think, he's a defensive-minded guy, if I remember. And I just don't think that's quite what the Jazz need. I think they need someone who's, maybe a little younger, a little more innovative than what someone like Vogel would bring.
All right. Mike D'Antoni.
D. I think his play through the superstar is really boring to watch, and I like to watch Jazz basketball. So, nope.
Yeah, I think I would give that a D as well. I don't think he really even wants to be a head coach anymore. I don't think he wants to deal with that, but I think you go too far in the other direction compared to like Frank Vogel, right? It's all offense, very little defensive strategy, which again, I think is too far in the other way for the Jazz. And I think you need a guy who can develop and relate to players. And I don't think that Mike D'Antoni has shown that he could do that. I do want to just say I do respect Mike D'Antoni. I think he's been one of the great innovators of the league for the last 20 years. So I do want to give him his flowers, but I just don't think that it's the right fit. And I don't think that's something he's interested in.
All right. And last guy, Tyrone Corbin.
A+.
A+ if you want to get Victor Wembanyama next year.
Bring back the Corbin years.
Just say.
Which I don't not want to. Just saying, but.
Just saying, if all we had to do to get Victor Wembanyama was to bring back Tyrone Corbin, I would say 100% let's do it. But it's been a rough season. We know that we're going into something changing in the future. We know we're going to get a new head coach, but at least we can sleep well tonight knowing that as bad as our head coaching job is going to be, it's not going to be as bad as Tyrone Corbin. And
we'll see.
Let's see. And that wraps up part one of this podcast. We're going to be back right after this break with part two. We're going to be talking a little bit more about what we think the Jazz should be doing in this offseason, general strategies, along with each of us going step by step, explaining if we were the Jazz top brass, what would we do to prepare for next season? So thanks, y'all, and we'll be back in just a couple minutes with part two. Welcome back to part two of this podcast, the mock offseason edition. For those of you who don't know Kyler, Landon, and I, we are all massive Jazz fans, but we are also massive basketball nerds. And one of the things we love to chat about and think about the most is roster building and team construction. So things like the draft, things like trades, things like different rotations we could play against different teams, different styles of basketball we could play with different types of players. These are things that we think and talk about all the time. So today we're going to put our Jazz nerdiness to the test. And we've each gone through, we've created our own mock offseason as if we were the Jazz's top brass. So we're some combination of Ryan Smith, Justin Zanuck, Danny Ainge, where we get to make all the decisions and choose what we want the Jazz's roster to look like next year. Just so you know, any trades, any drafts that we've looked at, etc., all of this research has been we've done a pretty good job on looking at it to make sure that it's not too crazy. So all of the trades that we've grabbed, they've been taken from places like Sports Illustrated or Hoops Hype, where they go through and they've broken down these trades, just saying like this is something that could potentially happen or should happen. So even though some of these may seem to favor the Jazz a little bit more than most, we have made sure to go through and not throw in anything that would be a little too crazy. So we'll go through one by one, starting with Landon, then myself, and then Kyler. And we're each going to kind of give what would we do in a mock off season as the decision maker of the Utah Jazz. So Landon, take it away.
Okay. So first thing I would want to say is I don't think you could build a championship contending team around either Rudy Gobert or Donovan Mitchell. So I think if we're going to this offseason wanting to change, we should probably move both of them. So I'll start with that. However, I think there's a lot of good young talent in the league right now, as is, that I think we could leverage our talent to get and help, be a good core to build around. Obviously, building around the draft is great, but I think there's a very significant level of risk when, you try to build around a draft and pick draft picks. Not to say that those aren't important, but, who's to say that, the guy you pick, the guy you want to be the cornerstone of your franchise ends up being a dud, and then you get stuck in this kind of, rebuild limbo where you're always trying to, get good lottery picks and build with those. And there's no guarantee that they turn out. So mine is definitely centered around getting, more kind of younger proven talent that's already in the league. So with that said, the first thing that I would want to do is move Donovan Mitchell. I think what makes sense to me would be the trade rumors that we hear with the Miami Heat. I would want to move Donovan Mitchell to Miami, and that deal would be centered around, Donovan Mitchell and Tyro Hero. I think you probably need Duncan Robinson and then a draft pick or two to make that work. But I am kind of a big Tyler Hero fan. I think given the right opportunities, he could be a star in this league. Coming right off that 6th Man of the Year win, I think give him reps with, starting level talent. He'll adapt. He's got all the tools to do. I think he could be a prime scorer on a pretty good team. So that's probably what I would want to do and push to do. Now, as far as moving Rudy Gobert, because I think that is something we do, I think the trade partner that makes the most sense with him is the Toronto Raptors. I think we could get, work out some kind of deal centered around OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam. Honestly, I'm fine with either one of them. I think they both offer tremendous value, can really help the Jazz going forward, especially to help kind of patch those defensive holes that they had on the perimeter, if that's something that is a priority for them. So that's what I would do with them. The last thing that I would kind of want to do is I would want to move Mike Conley. There's 2 trades that I would pursue for that. One of them, and I got to say it because I feel like you hear this all the time, maybe look at the Lakers, see if we can make a deal centered around Conley and Westbrook. Now, obviously, I don't think we want Westbrook or keep him, but maybe, I think he's only got like a year left on his contract or something. We can maybe buy him out. But maybe along with Westbrook, we could talk him into throwing us a draft pick or Taylor Horton Tucker. So that's what I would do there. As far as everyone else, I don't necessarily mind keeping them, re-signing them. I don't mind keeping a Royce O'Neal or Jordan Clarkson for that matter, at least for now. Maybe let their contracts expire and free up cap space to sign somebody else in the future off seasons that could help build around. But I think initially that's kind of my blueprint. That's the kind of path that I would want to go looking at the season, wanting to rebuild.
I think Kyler, he's gotten so excited that his mic isn't working.
Yep. Sorry, I was coughing, so I had to mute my mic. I can imagine a big 3 of Russell Westbrook, OG Anunoby, and Tyler Hero. And
Title contender.
I'm as big of an OG Anunoby fan as anyone. I think as far as a player-based trade, I think Toronto does make the most sense out of, like the DeAndre Hunters or the Patrick Williamses or whatever, kind of those young players. I think I like OG Anunoby the best. I prefer an RJ Barrett over Tyler Hero if you're looking for a player. Just personally, I think Danny Ainge, that's kind of the player he leans to more as well. And yeah, I would love to be able to get a pick off of Conley. That'd be great.
Yeah, I think just the thing that I struggle with the most out of that trade is just the Westbrook part. Because if we're getting Westbrook, I don't ever want him to play in Utah. For one, just because I think he'd be a terrible fit. And then there's also a lot of history there
Utah.
between. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
he hates Utah, and to be fair, for a damn good reason. Some
Absolutely.
Utah fans suck. But I think just the biggest thing is that if we're going to trade Mike Conley, then I want it to be as much as a picks or young player based package. And I think that we could potentially get a better young player than a Taylor Horton Tucker, which you mentioned, or maybe some better picks or some picks that will maybe, come over to us sooner than I think. I think the soonest the Lakers can trade a pick is 2027 or something like that. And I'd prefer to get a pick that's going to happen before then. But I mean, I think when it comes to a Rudy Gobert trade for a player, I think Toronto makes a ton of sense. It's just, how do we want to build around the rest of it? Because are we going to win now? Are we trying to win now? Are we trying to get assets for the future? And I think that there's a little bit of both with what you want to do, which I think is a balanced approach, which could work.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyler Hero and OG Anunoby, their age too, they can be on a team that sucks for a couple of years and then gets another couple young pieces. And so it's an interesting thing to do. Depends on how you view Tyler Hero and OG Anunoby, I guess, is the biggest part.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All right.
And to be fair, I just want to say I don't expect Russell Westbrook to be in a Jazz jersey at any time. If that's something that happens, I just want to flip Conley for picking, young prospect.
Yeah, which I mean that'll be interesting to see. What can the Jazz get off of Mike Conley? I was reading in Sports Illustrated last week. They had a new article where they said every team needs to trade at least one player, and they went through each team and was like, "Oh, so and so needs to trade so and so." And for the Jazz, they were pretty adamant that if the Jazz want to move forward, they have to trade Mike Conley. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if that actually does happen this offseason. All right.
If they're trying to move forward this offseason, or are they trying to move back?
Who knows? I guess we'll just have to find out and see. For me, when I was building mine, I gotta say, when I can't sleep well, I just think basketball, and I start doing stuff basketball. So this was me not being able to fall asleep last week for about an hour and a half, just looking at a bunch of different trades and doing this at 2:00 in the morning. So some of this will hopefully make sense, but I personally would love the team that this would create. So in general, here's what I want to do. I think that what Kyler said earlier about Donovan Mitchell, it being hard to build a title contending team around him, I think that's accurate with where he is right now. That being said, I think with the teams that Donovan Mitchell has played on, we haven't yet seen the best version of Donovan Mitchell. And I think that the best version of Donovan Mitchell can be a significant step forward than what he is right now. Because as of right now, he's like a top 7, 8 guard in the league, just barely out of that all NBA range, but very solidly an all-star. And I think he could definitely get up into the top 3 or 4 guard range in the entire NBA if he was put in the right situation. So what I want to do is that I want to build a team centered around Donovan Mitchell, unlocking him the best that he can be as a player, and then building a team kind of around that that'll maximize who he is and make sure that we can score a bunch of points in the process. I think the ideal role for Donovan is to be a score first point guard, kind of in the same general mode as like a Steph Curry, a Dame Lillard, a Trae Young, a guy who can score like crazy, but can also facilitate on the side, which he's shown over the last season or two that's something he's definitely working on. So here's what I would do. First things first, we got to trade Rudy Gobert. My favorite trade that I found for him is with Sacramento, where we traded Rudy Gobert for Rashawn Holmes, Harrison Barnes, and the number 4 overall pick in the draft this year. Now, I know what you're saying. Number 4 pick for Rudy Gobert seems a little bit insane. However, if there's ever a team that would be dumb enough to do that, it would be the Sacramento Kings, who has been given an ultimatum that if they don't make the playoffs this year and have a really great defensive team, then everyone in the front office is going to get fired, and Rudy Gobert can help solve a lot of those problems. Next, I'm trading Mike Conley to the Pelicans for Devontae Graham, Larry Nance, and a 2023 first. Wait for it. I'm getting there. Third trade. The Jazz acquire Miles Turner, center for the Pacers, in a 3-team trade with the Bucks. Now, I've seen a few different versions of this online, but the general idea is that the Jazz give up Jordan Clarkson, Devontae Graham, and a first, with Jordan Clarkson and Devontae Graham going to the Bucks, the first-round pick kind of being a filler, and then the Jazz getting back Miles Turner, with Portland getting the majority of the picks there. So we'll just say, even though it's a 3-team trade, the Jazz give up Clarkson, Graham, and a first in order to get Turner and some sort of filler. After that, we use our number 4 overall pick to draft a wing or a forward, because we know the top 3 is pretty well cemented with Holmgren, Smith, and Paolo. So I would say that I haven't quite decided yet, but maybe like a Keegan Murray, AJ Griffin, Jaden Ivey. I really like Johnny Davis and Jeremy Sohan too. So one of those guys who's a really strong forward prospect. As of right now, I'm probably leaning Keegan Murray. And then finally, the Jazz somehow are able to sign Zach LaVine. Now, the Jazz's backcourt is going to be tough defensively. But once you look at the roster and you break it down, you have our guard lineups, or our guard rotation, being Donovan Mitchell, Zach LaVine, Jared Butler. Our forwards, Royce O'Neal, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Harrison Barnes. And our bigs is Miles Turner, Rashawn Holmes, and Larry Nance. I know that
You better draft Jeremy Sohan, because that defensively's not it, man.
I know that it's a bit of a tough team defensively, but I'm going all in on we're scoring, we're spacing, we are, doing well in transition, and we're going to go a team that for years had a defensive identity, and we're really going to go all into the pace and space movement. We're going to get a bunch of athletic guys. We're going to be really switchable, and even though we're not going to be the defensive powerhouse that we've been in the past, I think with so many athletic, shooting-centric players, along with 2 guys who can take over any game in Zach LaVine and Donovan Mitchell, that it's definitely a risky proposition, but I think the Jazz could be catapulted into just an offensive level that is just crazy while being good enough on defense to make it work.
I have a lot to comment on here, but Landon, do you have anything to say?
Go ahead.
Oh man. Okay. I think a few of these trades and signings are very optimistic for the Jazz. First off, the New Orleans Pelicans trade with Mike Conley, I don't think it's bad value for Conley. I just think New Orleans does not need another offensive player. They need defense. CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson, their other 2 starters should be defense. Like, you can almost say that those 3 can be an entire offense. Like, I don't even care if they're one-way players, like defense-only players at this point. Like, they need defense. I mean, I guess the Pelicans are building like your Jazz team is, offense only. With this team, sure, let's go get Mike D'Antoni, because he's gonna get the most of this. My thing is, the biggest takeaway, apart from the fact that I love Miles Turner, so getting him is, yeah, let's go, thumbs up. We were the number 1 offensive rated team last year, and then basically we're trading Rudy Gobert for Miles Turner, worse defensively, and Mike Conley for Zach LaVine essentially not moving the needle defensively. Like, where we need to improve, I think, is defensively, and we're just getting even better offensively. Just like we want, it's the 130, 128 kind of team, and it's very exciting. But after watching the Jazz the last couple of years just not be able to play defense in the playoffs, oh boy. Yeah, if you thought that Jazz team was bad defensively, I think like you have to draft one of these forwards that's going to be really good defensively. At that point, you're probably looking at Keegan Murray or Jeremy Sohan. But
see, and because I thought about this a lot, and I knew like the defensive aspect that on paper this looks a lot worse. And the one thing I kept coming back to was the Jazz have been worse in each of the last 6 postseasons compared to the regular season. And seeing a center who, despite being one of the best defensive prospects of this generation, and Rudy Gobert, has pretty much been played off the court just because we haven't been able to play so many different styles of basketball. And even though we were amazing when it came to having that traditional big, our ability to play different types of basketball and really being able to match up well against our opponents, I think is what really killed us in the postseason. I do not expect this to be an amazing regular season defense, but I think where with your bigs, you have a lot of different people you can throw at them, because what you're going to get with Rashawn Holmes, what you're going to get with Miles Turner, what you're going to get with Larry Nance are all going to be very different. And even though I wouldn't say that Zach LaVine or Donovan Mitchell are great defenders, they're both athletic as all get out. And same thing with a lot of our forwards is that there are a lot of really big guys who are solid defenders. But I think a lot of the switching that we've seen happen in the postseason, where it's made it really difficult for the Jazz to play good defense, I think a lot of that is solved by having a team that's built more like this. So even though it's not a lot of great individual defenders, I think the kind of defensive system you could run with a team like this could potentially be better for postseason basketball, even if it's not going to put up crazy defensive numbers in the regular season. And I fully admit this is a risk. This could, if this were to happen, it could be an absolute shit show and not be good at all. But just seeing what we are of what the Jazz have been the last few seasons, I would rather swing for the fences, try to build a team that's very different than what we've had in the past. And I think this is a team that could be, if not anything else, a whole lot of fun to watch.
I was just gonna say that I think even if they're bad, or not a contending team, this would probably be the most entertaining iteration of Jazz basketball we've ever seen.
Donovan Mitchell and Zach LaVine just chucking up step back threes all game. It's gonna be entertaining. But I don't know if that's a winning formula.
Yeah.
Miles Turner is a great shot blocker. In terms of rim protection, you're never going to get as really good as Rudy Gobert, but it's still a top tier. I love Miles Turner so much. I covet so much a guy that can play the 5 defensively and the 4 offensively. I think it's such a rare and awesome skill set. So that's my favorite part. If I had to give you the best move of your offseason, I think it's acquiring Miles Turner, because he is one of my favorites. He's like my man crush big, I guess you could say. So
thank you. All right, and last but not least, Kyler, I have an inkling of what you're going to do here, but I'm excited to see how it actually comes out. So let's hear. What would you do?
Okay. So I have struggled so much about what I would do with the Jazz offseason. I've been talking to people about this for months. I've known that I've wanted to shake things up for a long time, since, like I said in the beginning of the podcast, since basically before this season even started. And so my ideas have shifted. And so I decided I'm too muddy on what I would do. But I wanted to play around with some hypotheticals. As most of my friends know, I'm obsessed with the draft. My favorite day of every year is the NFL draft. For that weekend, the 3-day weekend, I will shut myself out. I rejected hanging out with you guys because of his day 3 of the draft this year. 5 hours in, I said, no, 7th round, I'm watching. And so right up there is the NBA draft too. I love it. I love watching new players come into the league and see how the league is trying to team build. So my hypothetical offseason is, what if we went OKC? What if we said, I don't want players. I don't care what my team looks like next year. I want to compete with OKC as to who has the most draft picks. I don't think we can get there, but I tried to see what's the best combination of picks we can get. And here's what I came up with. The first one, I think 4 is way too rich for Rudy Gobert, but for Rudy Gobert, a team that you never really know if they're competing or if they're rebuilding, but reports have been out that they are trying to move this 7th pick, Portland Trail Blazers. We send Rudy to Portland for 7, and in this, we basically give Anthony Simons a bag in free agency as a sign and trade. He's the only noteworthy player where we're getting back this whole offseason. Everything else is picks. But sign and trade, we're giving him 4 years, 25 to 30 million, whatever. We have to overpay him to get to Utah, but at least we have someone that, other than the rookies, that the Jazz fans could be excited about next year. Anthony Simons, you got to get someone. Everyone else's picks. All right, here we go. Next, Mike Conley. I have the same idea as Landon here. We talked about it off air a lot, so I'm not surprised we had the same idea here. But I'm like, who would give you a pick for Mike Conley at this point in his career? And the only team I could really think of that needs a starter that gives you what Mike Conley does is LA. And they have a guy who, despite, Coach Ham's comments from his introductory press conference, I think there are more out on him than he made it seem like. And so it's a bad contract for a team that's trying to compete. They're getting off of. They might send us the first round pick. They might send us 2. I'm feeling generous. 2 first round picks. A, to get off of Russ's horrible contract, and B, to get a starter, a quality starter, right? Like Mike Conley, what he came to Utah to do, he's no longer really capable of. He's not your second. He's like not your 2A, 2B offensive player. But if you're asking him to be your 3rd or 4th best offensive player, I think he can fill that role. And I think he will be that role in Los Angeles. 3rd. Oh, no. Not 3rd trade. 3rd item of business. We're buying out Russell Westbrook. I don't want him on the Jazz. He doesn't want to be on the Jazz. We're not trying to pay nobody other than Anthony Simons, so we can eat the whatever. He's off. I don't want anything to do with Russell Westbrook other than getting 2 first round picks for taking him on. 3rd trade, Jordan Clarkson. This is just one idea. I think there's a number of teams that would want Jordan Clarkson, but for this activity, Philadelphia 76ers give us pick 23 and some matching salary, which might include George Niang. Who knows? For Jordan Clarkson. I think a pick in the early 20s is about as good as you're going to get for Jordan Clarkson, unless you want like a future pick that you don't really know where it's going to be. But if you want like a this year or next year pick, I think that's about kind of the range you're looking at. The big kahuna, Donovan Mitchell. We know he's the most valuable asset in the Jazz. He's going to Detroit in this. You're like, Detroit, why? I think there's been a lot of buzz about, hey, Cade Cunningham's the real deal, and Detroit might want to get him some playoff experience early in his career. And if you think about what Donovan Mitchell's limitations are, it has to do with size and the fact that despite J. Bobby's faith that he can be a 1, he kind of shows like this tunnel vision of maybe you don't believe it. So you want, but having him then you need like a really big 1, which I believe Cade Cunningham is. They could trade for Donovan Mitchell and still have max cap space. So then you're looking at a lineup like Cade, Donovan, Sadiq Bey, Jeremy Grant, DeAndre Ayton. All of a sudden, you think it might work out for Detroit. And here's what they send us. Pick 5, a 2024 top 3 protected, a 2026 unprotected, and pick swaps in 2023 and 2025. They also send us Killian Hayes, Hamidou Diallo, and Kelly Olynyk, one of J. Bobby's dudes. And if he picks up his option, which I believe he would, Corey Joseph, they actually send us more salary in this than we give them, which gives them even more cap space to sign their max guy and fill out what could be a competitive roster in the East next year. The last trade is Bojan Bogdanovic. I think he's similar. I think he's worth like a late 1. So he's going to Miami for Duncan Robinson in 27. I think he's not this sieve defensively for Miami, so he can actually play, and Miami just needs offense. And I think Bojan Bogdanovic just can not only be a shooter, but he's shown some ability to kind of play in the post and in between game and a little bit off the dribble for the Jazz. So I think for a pick like 27, or even a future first round pick like 2024, I think it'd be worth it. I'm not going to go into like who we would sign on after that. I just want to give you an idea of what our draft assets would be after that. We'd have picks 5, 7, 23, and 27 this year. We'd have the right to pick swap with Detroit next year. We'd have a Detroit first 2 years. We'd have the right to pick swap after that, and then Detroit first after that. So not a lot of future assets. Maybe you end up, at least with one of the trades between Jordan and Bojan, you go for a future first rather than the first this year. But it looks good. Obviously, we owe a pick to OKC in 2024, which doesn't look great if you're rebuilding. It is top 10 protected. I feel like that's way too less of a protection for giving up Derek Favors. But for the most part, you have most of your own picks. You get a bevy of picks this year and some extra assets. And you build around Anthony Simons. If we're doing this, I would try, with everything I got, I would overpay through the mouth to get into the top 3. Let's say the Rockets don't like Paolo Banchero. It'll still come back. He's going to be the one that's going to be 3rd in this draft. Let's say, he doesn't fit with Jalen Green, and we like some other player, like Keegan Murray. And we're sitting there at 5. We're like, we'll give you 5, and we'll give you a crap ton of picks to pick the guy that you already want. Kind of like what the Celtics did, where they wanted Jason Tatum first, and Philly's like, yo, I want Markelle Fultz. I'll overpay, so you can still pick the guy that you want. So there's a chance that maybe the Rockets don't like the fit with Paolo and Jalen Green. If that's the case, I would overpay a ton for that. But if not, you still got a good bevy of picks, including 2 top 10 in this draft. That's it. I forgot about the Lakers one. We get a Lakers future one somewhere in there. I didn't put it in there, but there we go.
I mean, I think you channeled Sam Presti and all of his ancestors when you were coming up with this general plan. Here is my general thought. It might be tough if you want to see the Jazz in the playoffs, and I think it would be a little bit sad to some extent that the Jazz would be hosting the All-Star game in 2023, and they probably wouldn't have anybody in that game unless Anthony Simons just goes off, which I think is a little bit sad. So a few years of probably no playoff games and, maybe not a ton of great winning records for a couple years, but I think this would be so much fun. My favorite team to watch other than the Utah Jazz is the Orlando Magic and the OKC Thunder, because they have so many good young players where it's great to see them grow and improve as players, become better, work together as a team. So even though it might be a little sad for the average Jazz fan, I would have so much fun watching whether that's Paolo Banchero or Keegan Murray and all these other picks from 2022 and 2023, along with the guy Anthony Simons, who I loved coming out of the draft, by the way. I would just have so much fun with this team. So I think if you're looking long-term that you want the safest bet for being a title contender in 5 to 7 years from now, I think this is a great move to make.
Yeah, along with what you said, do you remember, obviously watching winning basketball is exciting, but you know what else is exciting? Watching the first couple of years of Donovan Mitchell's career when he was just improving a ton. But when's the last time you felt that way about a Jazz game? Where not only are you expecting them to win, but you're also excited about somebody getting better. I love watching that. Like you said, watching those rebuilding teams is really fun. Mine has been the Memphis Grizzlies, but they're kind of already there, so I guess I got to find a new one. But yeah, like I said, I wouldn't be this pick heavy. I'd trade at least Donovan for maybe a little bit more balanced one. Either Donovan or Rudy for a little bit more balanced one, I'd say. Unless pick 5 and 7 can get you into the top 3, then I think it's worth it. But if you're not getting a top 3 pick, I don't think just a solely picks based thing is quite as viable. But as far as future picks, getting 4 future picks between Detroit and LA, and then 4 picks in this first round, you could certainly do worse.
Yeah. And I think, if we do well in the draft and if, the basketball gods smile on us, this is probably the best way to rebuild. Obviously, look at a team like Golden State. Golden State is what they are because they were able to draft their core and keep them together. I think that's why they're as good as they are. With that said, though, I think this has the longest rebuild horizon out of any of these plans. So we're probably looking at several years here of developing and finding top level talent before we're really able to be contenders. So to JR's point, I think, for the diehard fans, that'll be fine. But I think for the casual fans and stuff, that will be a struggle to try and get behind that team. But I mean, it could definitely work. I agree. I think OKC is really fun to watch. I think they're really close to turning the corner and becoming a really good team. They've got a good core and they're going to continue to grow. So
if whoever they pick at 2 hits,
yeah, they're probably there.
Josh Giddey, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and a really good 4-man. I like that as a core to contend, including Lou Dort, who in terms of 3 and D prospects is one of the better younger ones.
We just gotta, do a better job of drafting in the lottery than what we have done.
Yeah, no,
past years.
Our last 2 top 5 picks were Enes Kanter and Dante Exum. So
which, I mean...
And we traded for Derek Favors, the other top 5 pick that we found on our roster. So,
well, let's not think about those whiffs in the draft too much. But Kyler, if the Jazz do end up going your path, let's hope that they hire Johnny Bryant instead of Terry Stotts. And let's hope that they hit on guys like Josh Giddey instead of their occasional whiffs like Poku, who I loved coming out of the draft. One of my biggest misses I've ever had in terms of my personal draft ideas. But
it's still young on Poku. Got to give him a chance.
Don't hit on Poku, man.
Yeah, he wasn't that early of a pick either. So,
well,
got to give those mid-round picks a little bit more time.
Yeah, and I mean, like, who knows? Maybe someday he'll be like 85 pounds. I mean, like, we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens. But that is going to do it for the end of this episode. And I think we can all agree, whatever happens, whatever the Jazz decide to do this offseason, both their head coaching hire and also with just their team roster construction in general, I think we can all agree it's definitely going to be a lot of fun, and we're going to have a lot of great new content coming your way. Once again, thank you for listening to this episode of the Upper Bowl Perspective. As always, joined by Kyler and Landon, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
Peace.